This is the 20th film in this franchise. That's a huge milestone, so they're gonna make sure that this is extra good and extra special, right? Right? Welcome back to the Countdown to Bond 25 here on Thumb Together. My name is Andrew Fantasia. Please like, please subscribe, please hug if you wish. This is the Countdown to No Time to Die, and we're getting closer. We have reached the 20th movie, which means we've only got 4 more to go. And today's movie is Die Another Day, the final Pierce Brosnan outing, which was released in November 2002. Now, the plot of Die Another Day is fairly straightforward, all things considered. The villain is a North Korean colonel who wants to march into South Korea and take it over. So he does this very elaborate thing. Long story short, he's got a satellite that can shoot the power of the sun into the earth, and he plans to do that to destroy the minefield separating the two Koreas so that he will have a clear path with which to march with his army and take over. I can't believe it was that straightforward to talk about, but there's a whole lot of middle in between that beginning and end, and that's where things get icky. Die Another Day's title song was sung by Madonna. They pulled out all the stops and got Madonna. The problem is, they got Duran Duran when Duran Duran was hot. They got Aha when Aha was hot. They got Madonna when Madonna was cold. And you can tell because this song is wretched. Take your mind on a trip back to the turn of the century and imagine the worst, cheapest, most god-awful techno club song you could possibly think of, and then try to somehow make it worse. And you've got a rough idea of what Die Another Day sounds like. And it's a shame because on the subject of hot and cold, the opening credits animation is actually kind of neat. James Bond is being tortured throughout this whole time, so they really play with the duality of fire and ice because he's being tortured with hot and cold, and both fire and ice play a big part in the movie itself. In fact, ice was all over the marketing for Die Another Day. So they did a really good job tying the credits into the themes of the story, but my God, that song. I'm gonna close my body now. This should not exist. Even though this is the 20th movie, there are actually quite a few firsts. I was surprised. The first one happens right off the bat with the opening gun barrel. I guess they were really just trying to be in your face. So what they did was they literally put the bullet in your face. That's right. Instead of just James Bond shooting and then the camera turning red, we actually see the bullet that comes out of James Bond's gun. A giant CGI bullet shoots right into the audience's eyeballs. And it's the definition of excessive American in-your-face action cinema. And that's a problem you're going to hear me talk about throughout this entire retrospective here, is that there's a big difference between British cinema and American cinema. It's subtle, but it's big. And Die Another Day is as American as an action film can possibly be, which I think is what turned off a lot of people. In the meantime, some other firsts include James Bond is captured and tortured by the North Korean army. So from the opening teaser to after the credits, we have 14 months that he spends in this North Korean prison just getting tortured with scorpions and ice and shit. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. And when he is released from the prison, obviously he's all straggled. He's got Jesus hair. He's got a beard. So it's a side of James Bond we'd never seen. And that, I remember feeling kind of epic and neat. And it did reinforce the feeling that, ooh, this was a special movie. This was the 20th one. This was a big deal because of how different it was. Now with hindsight, it just, it loses some of that luster. But it was there. When the movie was new, this part shined. We're also celebrating the first time a main Bond lady is played by an African-American actor because we have Halle Berry stepping into that role. So that's a very nice little treat. And finally, I can't believe it took 20 movies to get to this, but you see, kids, James Bond has a lot of sexual intercourse with women. It's kind of what he likes to do. However, this is the first time in 20 movies that you can see James Bond climax on camera. Just in case that's something you wanted to experience, Die Another Day has got you covered for some reason. Now, since this is the 20th Bond film, and since it was a film that came out in 2002, obviously the Q gadgets got out of hand. That was an inevitability. The best one is something called a sonic agitator ring, which is just a weird looking ring, and then if James Bond twists it, it'll shatter glass. I like that one. Straightforward. Then there is some kind of Ready Player One VR training simulator that MI6 uses, and I don't care much for this. I feel like, yes, even though there are advancements in technology and that it is in the best interests of national security for every country to take advantage of these advancements as much as possible, the British government is particularly fond of tradition. And I find it hard to believe that secret agent training would lean towards VR as opposed to something more tactile. It just doesn't seem like a practical way to train your 00 agents. And I am positive, even though I am the farthest thing from a British man, I am positive that England would much rather let their agents train the old-fashioned way. This was clearly just put in here so the audience can be like, ooh, that's cool. James Bond has VR now. Then the creme de la creme of over-the-top gadgets comes in the form of Bond's new car, the Aston Martin Vanquish, which Q colloquially terms as the Aston Martin Vanish, because James Bond's car can turn invisible now. He is Wonder Woman now. Remember back in Thunderball when they spent way too much time underwater because underwater cameras had just been invented, so the director was just blown away and wanted to show off this technology to the world? That's what I feel is happening here. They perfected the art of using CGI to make a car invisible, and it feels like they were just like, wow, look what we can do with our computers. We have to show this to the world, and that ended up giving us the Aston Martin Vanish. It's okay. I don't hate it. But there's way better things they could be doing with their time. What I do really enjoy, though, is as a little treat for the 20th Bond film, the scene that takes place in Q Branch has a ton of Easter eggs in the background where you can see a bunch of gadgets from movies past. The ones that I spotted were the alligator suit from Octopussy, the shoe blade and the briefcase from Russia with Love, the jetpack from Thunderball, and Little Nelly from You Only Live Twice. I'm sure there's others in there that were just buried in the background that I couldn't see. But that's a scene I really enjoy. That feels like something the MCU would do. The MCU loves throwing Easter eggs like that. James Bond that's never really been their style, but the fact that they did this was a nice little treat for the fans, especially because it's our first movie without Desmond Llewellyn. So having that there softened that blow a little bit. The role of our main Bond lady, filled out by the lovely Halle Berry, is Jinx Johnson, a spy who works for America. And Jinx is, I think, annoying is the best thing to call her. Look, Halle Berry is an incredibly talented lady. This lady can act. And it's like all of her acting chops kind of got sucked out the window and she just read the lines. I don't know what's going on here. And it's a shame because, again, it's our first main African-American Bond lady. You'd think they could have put in a little bit more effort. Instead, she just is constantly dropping these stupid wisecracks and bad jokes and corny dialogue. As cringy as the dialogue was in The World Is Not Enough, it doubles down on that in Die Another Day. You might want to bring some cotton to plug your ears and just enjoy the visuals, because the speaking in this movie is a war crime. And the funny thing is, they were so ambitious and so overeager back in 2002. They had plans. Let me tell you, they had plans. Because you see, Jinx is sort of the American equivalent to James Bond in this movie, and her boss, Falco, is played by Michael Madsen, who is the American equivalent to M. And what MGM had brewing was they were going to spin Jinx off into her own franchise. The idea was Die Another Day would introduce Jinx, and then we would continue James Bond movies, but we would also get another through line of movies about Jinx being an American secret agent with Michael Madsen as her stern employer who sits behind a desk and tells her what to do. And we would follow Jinx on all of her adventures, and they would be wild and wacky just like this. I'm really glad that didn't pan out. As much as I'm a fan of expanding worlds, this was not the right corner to expand. Again, this is too American, and I don't understand why they were going for that. James Bond is an English franchise. It comes from the UK. Just like Doctor Who, just like Sherlock Holmes, just like Mr. Bean. Would you want to see a Mr. Bean spin-off where it's just some dude from Wyoming who's like, I'm also really quiet but good at miming things? No! Why? What's the point? Jinx Johnson, you will not be missed. And neither, for that matter, will any of Die Another Day's villains. There's a henchman with a classic henchman-y name. His name is Mr. Kill, and he does have a really fun death scene, but Mr. Kill is literally just a scary big guy in a suit. His first line of dialogue is just to walk up to James Bond and say, I'm Mr. Kill. It's really like they weren't even trying. A more memorable henchperson comes in the form of Miranda Frost, played by the very lovely Rosamund Pike, but even she suffers from the atrocious dialogue that she has to speak and just kind of ends up existing just so that Halle Berry can have someone to punch. I do like that they made her an MI6 agent who is corrupt. I think that was a nice little twist. Again, it feels very spy-ish. It feels very Bondian. But Miranda Frost is never somebody I remember all that well. In fact, when I put this movie on to watch it again, I totally forgot that she ends up being a villain. Our final henchman is Zhao. Zhao's pretty cool. He's halfway through a transformation, so he looks like he's albino and he's got ice blue eyes, and a briefcase of diamonds exploded near his face, so he's got all these diamonds encrusted in his skin. He causes a lot of trouble for Bond. It takes a lot to bring him down. And if I may say, that dark green Jaguar XKR that he drives might be the sexiest Bond car since the Aston Martin DB5. This Jaguar, I'm getting hot in here just thinking about it. And this brings us to our main antagonist, Colonel Moon. A very interesting character because he's hot-headed, he's complex. He is more evil than his father, who is a general. His father is just sort of going through the motions and trying to do what he thinks is best for his country. His father seems like an honorable guy, but then along comes his son, the colonel. He's psychotic, he's intense, and he feels extraordinarily dangerous. Plus, he is our first primary antagonist in the series to be played by an Asian man. So another great little treat, Colonel Moon would have been an exceptional Bond villain. Except his main plot line revolves around faking his own death and getting plastic surgery to conceal his identity from the world. And the plastic surgery that Colonel Moon gets turns him into a pasty, dweeby little British man played by Toby Stephens named Gustav Graves. Now, the fact that Gustav Graves is a really cool Bond villain name notwithstanding, why did you do this, movie? In the very first Bond film, in Dr. No is our main villain and he's supposed to be Asian, but because it was 1962 and people were weird, they just dressed a white man up to look Asian. Now, it's 40 years later, it's 20 movies later, they could have rectified that mistake, but instead, what do? They take another Asian main villain and make him a white guy. They only had 2 Asian villains in their whole franchise, and they hid them both behind white faces. I don't understand why they did this. It's like in 20 years they came full circle, they learned nothing. The sad thing is, when we meet Colonel Moon in the cold open, he is a genuinely cool villain. We want more out of this guy. And he dies very unceremoniously, and it's a little bit of a bummer. But not as big of a bummer as when we realize he has come back as this little dweeb who walks around talking about his dreams and ends up wearing some kind of shock-absorbing Iron Man armor. No, thank you. The fact that they went from Electra King to this guy really breaks my heart. Will Yun Lee, who plays Colonel Moon, does a terrific job with what little screen time he gets. And as far as I'm concerned, he was robbed here. The death trap of Die Another Day is funny because it feels like it took a classic Bond death trap and just Americanized it and made it extreme because that was the whole point of this movie, I think. Envision, if you will, the laser table from Goldfinger, and now imagine that there were a bunch of lasers all at once going around the room chaotically. And that's our death trap. Jinx is tied up to this table with all these lasers that they use to cut the ice at the Ice Palace where Gustav Graves lives. I can't believe I just said a sentence like that out loud. And Mr. Kill decides he wants to Mr. Kill her by turning on the laser. And then a fight ensues because James Bond shows up and all the lasers go haywire. And eventually she stops Mr. Kill with a laser to the back of the head. So it's a fun death trap. I'll give it that. I was honestly afraid because I got deep into this movie and realized I was going to be hard-pressed to find my favorite quote, considering just how bad the dialogue was. So thank God for John Cleese. During the scene at Q Branch, John Cleese shows Bond his gadgets, Bond is impressed, and Bond says, "You're cleverer than you look." And Q responds with, "Better than looking cleverer than you are." The fact that this ended up being the best quote of Die Another Day, does that tell you anything? It tells me something. Obviously, the most problematic moment is what I've already mentioned. They took a great Asian character and hid him behind the face of a white man. Poor choice. Moving on. At least Die Another Day globe hops a lot and gives us some cool places like North Korea, Hong Kong, Havana, Cuba, and an ice palace in Iceland. And they all look great. That Hong Kong skyline is so heartbreakingly beautiful. They did not skimp on the visuals in Die Another Day. And yes, I realize I am saying that about a movie that has an invisible car in it. It does give us one different action set piece, which is a very big, long sword fight. And that sword fight is bananas. We've never seen this kind of thing in a Bond film before, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it the first time I saw it. But the more I watch it, the more I'm like, you know what? This is one of the funnest and funniest parts of the movie. It goes on way too long. They get way too into it. I think I love the sword fight for all the wrong reasons, but I do like it. Here is a fun/sad fact about Die Another Day. Out of the whole franchise, it's the only premiere that was attended by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Isn't that something? This whole time, during her entire reign, her country's most popular movie franchise has been coming out, constantly putting out some pretty decent quality action films and spy films, and she has just been busy with her own stuff. And then one day she goes, "You know what? I think it's high time I went to a premiere for one of these Bond films. After all, I am the Queen of England, and England is the main exporter of James Bond. I should see what these are all about." And she goes to the premiere of this, the most over-the-top American Bond film ever made. The irony, Your Majesty, is delicious. And the ending really cements the over-the-topness because it ends with James Bond and Jinx Johnson having sex on top of a pile of perfectly cut diamonds. If that doesn't put a perfect visual bow on the idea of American excess, especially the type of excess that dominated mid to late 90s/early 2000s American action films, I don't think anything will. I think it's funny that this signaled the death knell, not only for Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond, but for these types of movies in general. After this point, giant blockbuster action films took a different turn and they became classier. And there's really no other word for it. They did become classier. After half a decade of stuff like Independence Day and Batman and Robin and Men in Black and The Rock, it shifted into something with a bit more substance. And we started to get things like The Lord of the Rings and Batman Begins, and then eventually Casino Royale. So if you ever wanted to chart the pattern of how American blockbuster cinema reached a point in the 90s where it was universally acknowledged as garbage and everybody, fans and creators alike, had to dial it back and reevaluate themselves as people, you could say Die Another Day was the nadir. It was the point of no return. It was the moment where we slowed down the car and realized we were in fact heading in the wrong direction. So for that, I do want to salute it as a little piece of history, but thank God we are out of that neck of the woods. And tomorrow we can jump ahead 4 years to 2006 when Daniel Craig steps into the role and we get a whole new era of Bond. The era we're still living in to this day. The countdown to Bond 25 continues.